the downhill slide, like I said last week, right? No,
Yeah.
okay, right. So we're on the downhill slide when it comes to time, right? We're on the halfway home, but we're on the uphill climb for the amount of work that we have to do. I know, I'm sorry, Mackenzie, but there's just no getting around it. We really do want you to be very, very well prepared for your professional school. So although you might find it abusive, I assure you, you will have that leg up on your fellow classmates when you get to your professional school. And I shared with you a letter that I got from a student. I get many of those, and it's not for me waving my flag. It really is to show you that what we do here is for your own best interest. Not to be a barrier, not to create a wall, but to make you very successful and confident in what you know. And believe it or not, we get a lot in there. You might feel like towards the end of the semester, I'm going to forget, but when you get in your professional school and you're getting back into the information, you'll be surprised how quickly it comes back. It will come back. It's like riding a bike. Okay, so we are moving on to capillary hemodynamics. This is beyond just learning your blood vessels and their layers and what's happening where. This is beyond learning that veins are your capacitance vessels and your arterioles are your restrictive vessels. It goes beyond to startling forces at the capillary layer, or level, I should say. And at the capillary layer level, we have these 4 forces that I need to teach you. And if you keep in mind those 4 forces, these are physical forces that have been measured. These aren't some random made-up numbers. These are real. And anytime you see a patient with edema, you need to come back to those 4 forces and figure out which of those 4 is the culprit. I'm going to upload for you a paper that I uploaded for my pathophys class that refers to, do you remember the kwashiorkor and the ascites accumulating? Well, in the clinical world, apparently, I didn't know this till I started teaching pathophys and delving more deeply into content, that they call that third spacing. That when they get that edema accumulating in the peritoneal space, they refer to that as third spacing. So if you hear someone saying third spacing, I want you to think of abnormal fluid accumulation in an extracellular space. So it's a really easy paper. I think it's from Journal of Nursing or something like that. And I'm not going to test you on the paper. I just thought maybe you might like that for your own personal, interesting papers, things to reference to when you're writing your clinical care plan. So I'll be sure to upload that for you. Anyway, that's the purpose of this lecture, is to make sure you understand what that third spacing event is. It's all about that kwashiorkor. I taught you about the edema. Now I'm going to teach you those 4 forces and how they play against each other. And you always need to remember those 4 forces. Don't memorize numbers, but learn those 4 forces and which way they are pushing or pulling on the fluid. So that's the purpose of today's lecture. Actually, to do this right, I'm going to have to go through till Thursday. There are 60 slides. It's not that hard, this material. I could go quickly through it, but I don't want to be quick and shortchange you. So if you have questions, be sure to stop me. Just a real quick anatomy review. The anatomy, of course, of blood vessels. Blood vessels carrying blood away from the heart, we call them arteries. Now, the arteries that are closest to the heart, those are elastic arteries. They actually have elastic fibers in their tunica media. And I'll review the layers of blood vessels. Moving away from those elastic arteries, we're going to have muscular arteries. Muscular arteries still have elastic fibers, but their elastic fibers are arranged as sheets, actual layers. They have a sheet of elastic tissue surrounding each side of the tunica media, and I'll be sure to point that out to you. Then we're going to get to smaller arterioles, and then we're going to get to the capillary bed. And then we're going to have blood return to the heart in venules that will converge to form larger veins, that will converge to form larger vena cava, that will ultimately return the blood back to the right atrium. So of course, when we think of blood vessels, we think of blood being transported, and the blood is transported to a capillary bed to allow exchange of nutrients and gases. But also, don't forget all the things that are dissolved in plasma. We've got electrolytes, we've got hormones, we've got clotting factors. There's a lot in there. So, big lecture. This is the outline for it. Now, somewhere, what was I going to say? Somewhere, oh, over here. Understanding flow and control of flow, autoregulation. I'm probably by Thursday going to add a few slides to my PowerPoint. Whatever I insert, I will upload on Blackboard. I will say, here are the extra slides I inserted. Don't reprint everything, just print those slides so that you have them. And again, that's all predicated on me getting computer time. So it may or may not happen. But the purpose of me wanting to readjust your slides is, did you notice that I uploaded that big concept map?
Yes.
Did you see that under the goodies that I told you for EKG? The concept map that I began with you all last week with cardiac output is regulated by heart rate, stroke volume, and what influences stroke volume. Well, that concept map that I uploaded on Blackboard now is giving you cardiac output and mean arterial pressure and everything that influences it. And my slides are not as complete as that concept map. So I want to work that in there. I want to make sure that what you are studying from is reflected on the slides. So that's the purpose of it. All right, and the very last part, of course, are the Starling forces. So arteries, they lead away from the heart. That's their strictest definition. But you cannot say that an artery always carries oxygen-rich blood. There are cases where that it does not apply. The pulmonary trunk, of course, and pulmonary arteries that are coming off the right side of the heart are carrying oxygen-poor blood. But they are still carrying the blood away from the heart. So think A for away and A for arteries. We have multiple layers in blood vessels, 3 layers or 3 tunics as they're called. So tunic is another word for layer. The layer that faces the blood, the lumen of the blood vessel, is called the tunica intima. Think of it as being intimate with the blood inside it. That is simple squamous endothelium. Going outward from the lumen, we're going to have the tunica media. Think M for middle and M for muscle. This is where we're going to find smooth muscle. Now, just to give you a little information on smooth muscle, smooth muscle is excitable tissue, but it has a unique property where if it's stretched, it allows more calcium to come into the cell. And that means a greater force of contraction. So it's an intrinsic property of smooth muscle. With more stretch, we'll see more vasoconstriction. And this is important because it will be a way that blood vessels auto-regulate their blood flow. And let me do a little teaser. This is going to be our transition from Lecture Unit 3 to Lecture Unit 4. Lecture Unit 3, I'm going to describe to you how blood vessels can auto-regulate. It comes down to this: increased stretch leads to more vasoconstriction. Decreased stretch leads to more vasodilation. The kidneys are the masters of this autoregulation. And therefore, from moment-to-moment changes in blood pressure, they can keep their filtration rate uniform, which is really a good thing. What happens when you exercise or get sexually aroused? Okay, don't answer that last part. Let me rephrase the question so I don't get more than what I want to hear. What happens to to your blood pressure when you exercise or get sexually aroused? It goes up. It goes up. Now, if you stop and think about blood arriving in your kidneys through arterioles, they're going to get to a modified capillary bed called the glomerulus. And the glomerulus is a type of capillary bed that's referred to as fenestrated. And it's very leaky. So if your blood pressure goes up, think of that as a pressure squeezing more of your plasma into the nephron. It would be really, really bad if your blood pressure goes up while you're exercising or thinking about having sex or engaging in the act, and then literally 5 minutes into whatever it is you're doing, you have to say, excuse me, I have to go potty. Because you're creating more filtration, which leads to more urinary output. It's a good thing that your kidneys, as your blood pressure goes up, more stretch on the vessel walls, can react with more vasoconstriction and maintain that filtration rate. Keep it even, not erratic. So that is a very important quality of smooth muscle found in the tunica media. The most external layer, or tunic, is the tunica externa, also known as the tunica adventitia. This is where we're going to find connective tissue, collagen fibers that run longitudinally, you know, the wrapping around the blood vessel. Now, the size of these layers, particularly the tunica media, is what's going to change as we go from smaller blood vessels, arteries, to muscular arteries, to arterioles. And then when we get to veins, we're going to see that they have a very thin tunica media, but it's still there. Don't dismiss it. With the capillaries, we're going to see that they have simple squamous endothelium. They have some outer connective tissue. They have pericytes anchoring them and supporting them, but we lose the tunica media. We need the thinnest possible layer of cells to allow rapid diffusion back and forth. So it's a filtration membrane that's suitable for diffusion. All right, so let's review our elastic arteries. Our elastic arteries are the arteries closest to the heart, the aorta, the pulmonary trunk, the carotids. Those are your elastic arteries. They're the closest to the heart. They're the ones that have to sustain the brunt of that force when the heart ejects the blood and the 70 milliliters stroke volume gets ejected. You want them to be distensible. You want them to be compliant. You don't want them to be rigid. They need to accommodate that bolus of blood. Their elastic fibers are going to be found in the tunica media, literally interspaced, woven with the smooth muscle cells. Now, as we get to muscular arteries, those are arteries that are going to serve organs, like a muscle, like your biceps brachii, or your stomach, or the hepatic artery. They're serving an organ. They still need elastic fibers. They need to be able to stretch as that pulse pressure wave comes through them and recoil. That's an important property of elastic tissue. Not just stretching, but recoil as well. But their elastic tissue is arranged differently. Instead of woven with the smooth muscle, we're going to see laminas, or sheets of elastic tissue. There is an elastic layer that is found in between the tunica intima and the tunica media. That is called the internal elastic lamina, meaning it's facing the internal lumen of the blood vessel. Then we find here, in the blue color, a second layer of elastic tissue. This is found in between the tunica media and the tunica adventitia. That's called the external elastic lamina. So instead of being interspersed in the tunica media, these sheets, layers of elastic tissue, are found around the tunica media, either in between it and the tunica intima, or on the back side of the tunica media, separating the tunica media from the tunica externa. So again, elastic property. This will allow expansion but recoil. Arterioles are the smallest arteries, but they are not the smallest blood vessels. Arterioles have very little elastic property to them. In fact, the thickness of their tunica media compared to their diameter, they have more tunica media, if you look at it with this ratio, than any other blood vessel. So think muscle, and think putting the pressure on the blood inside. Because they have very little elastic property, they're not going to be so compliant. They're not going to stretch as much with that pulse pressure wave. This is really important, because what's the next vessel after an arterial? Capillary. And now we're only talking tunica intima. When the heart contracts, Tuesday class, systolic pressure, 120.